In this clip, we're going to talk about how to build a narrative through level design. So in this particular level, we want to create something that is interesting. And we've talked about how to place objects, and placing objects is easy. Now, to build a narrative takes a little bit more work, and it's something that you will begin to practice as a level artist. So let's talk about the narrative that we want to create in this level. So we have our main character, Valdric. And Valdric is a dwarf, and he is living as an exile among his own people. Now, his clan committed a rebellion over 200 years ago, and his clan is still feeling the repercussions of that. And because of a mistake that was made long ago, he has to live as something that is not a dwarf. He longs for adventure, and he wants to do battle and do the things that any normal dwarf would want to do. And so Valdric has had enough of living in an oppressed way among his own people. And so he stumbled across an area that allows him to be a dwarf, where he can train. And he's training with a weapon that has been made out of an old shovel, and he uses it, and he tries to escape the normal oppressed life. Now, what draws him to this area is that there are old remnants of the old days. There are statues and fragments of architecture, and it's something that he's really drawn to, and it's something that he longs for. So it's something like that we can really build on top of, and we can create a level that has a story, and we can begin to project that to the player. So the way that we'll get started with that is by using prefabs. Let's start off with the statue prefab. And I just want to start placing these in the scene, just a few, or really just a couple. And I want them to be barely noticeable. I want them to live underneath the terrain. And I want them to just be a subtle detail, something that you really wouldn't notice unless you were really paying attention. So something like this, leaning up against the rock. Maybe we'll do one more over here. And we'll just kind of make some adjustments, putting this in place. And again, just making it to where you would barely even notice it. Something that is almost forgotten is kind of the idea that we want to create here. And then we can bring in other pieces of architecture like this pillar. Let's kind of bury this pillar in the back with these rocks, almost as if there was some sort of architecture planned here but then was abandoned. Let's have it lean back a little bit, almost as if it just lost its footing and then was just left behind for some reason. And then let's bring in things like the floor tiles. So we have these floor objects that we can use, and let's bury those under the dirt, almost as if something was started here at one time. And we can create little narratives like this. And again, we just want that terrain to kind of just barely reveal it. And then we want it to just be noticeable enough to where when they actually enter the ruins of the main part of the game, they'll recognize these architectural pieces, and it'll be something that we can draw back to. Now with this one, we have this floor tile, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of place it almost as if they were trying to make something out of this. Perhaps we'll move this rock out of the way. And I want it to be closely associated with this other one. So perhaps we can modify its shape there. And putting it under the terrain like this almost makes it seem fragmented. Now you can place floor tiles in here. You can place as many as you like. I'm actually going to put this right around here and maybe even make it a little smaller just to make that a smaller little detail. And then we could start to add things like plants and foliage. And it's enough to have all of this rock. But whenever you start to add things like foliage and plants and when you really start to get a lot and you start to make it thick, it makes the area look as though it's been abandoned for a long time and nature is taking over these things. And these are just remnants of what was here before. So let's go ahead and go to our vegetation folder, and let's go to this low folder. And I have Fern 01, and I'm going to bring this in. I'm actually going to reset its rotation. And I'm going to start to place these in the scene and just have them barely cover up like these statues, and see how it just kind of hides that, and you really wouldn't even be able to see it unless you were absolutely looking for it. And then it would make some a really nice little touch when the player does finally see it and say, oh wow, it can see that this was something that meant something to someone at one time, but it's almost been forgotten, but I just saw it. And so in a sense it's now not forgotten. So just adding little plants like these can really help. It's also really important that whenever you are a level artist and you're creating levels like this, go out and experience levels that are places, not levels, places that are similar to this. And you'll start to notice things like how ferns actually grow. And they do grow in areas like this with a lot of water and humidity, and the water drips off of the rocks, and these ferns just really soak that up. And being from an area that is similar to this with a lot of humidity and water, ferns are pretty rampant. And so you can kind of get familiar with your own levels, and by going to places and experiencing those places. Take photos and take notes of places that you've been, just so that way you can draw from that experience. I'm going to bring in a different fern here, and I'm going to make it just a little bit smaller. And I just want to break things up. Something that is really important about design is that whenever you have objects in the scenes, you don't want things that are very orderly, and you don't want things too cluttered. And so when you start to create little differences and nuances, it makes it seem more natural. This is one of those things that we don't really notice and we take for granted in the real world. But as a designer, it's things that we need to notice and really embrace. So we have these plants. I'm probably going to create one more, maybe place it right up against maybe this rock here, something like that. And I feel like I want to add something right in here. So I'm going to actually copy this rock and make a really small one next to it. So kind of nestle it in there, maybe even rotate it, so that way it definitely looks different. So kind of looking at the scene as a whole, we're starting to get that idea that, okay, that nature is trying to overtake it. Now there are some other vegetation pieces that we can use here, like these bushes. And I'm going to use this small tree, and I'm just going to left click and drag this into the scene. And for some reason, the scale is set to a really low value for some reason. So let's set it to 1 on that. And then, and let's grab our rotation tool, and I'm going to reset that actually. Not position, reset rotation. And what I want to do is I just kind of want to place these around the entrance area, just to give the idea that this area is hidden from the outside. And so as we start to create these thicker leaves, and you see them at the entranceway, it would give the idea that this place cannot be found unless you were specifically looking for it. So something kind of like that. And you can kind of see this muddy path. So this is an area that has been used over and over again, and he typically goes right in around these rocks and across these stones here. And so you can kind of see that he's visited this place often. Now, if your terrain texture looks a little bit different, don't worry about that. You can always repaint it. You can kind of start to think about these types of things. So then I'm going to bring this in. Now, I don't want to create something that would cause the you know, to where we can't actually see the area anymore. So we don't want to get too cluttered with all of this. Now I might do just one more here, and then it would be good to come in and adjust the scale of some of these pieces just to kind of show. If you take a look at foliage, typically foliage that's on the outside of large groups like this, that's new growth, and typically it's smaller. Be a good idea to come in and maybe do some rotations on some of these, so that way the pattern is not obvious to the player, and it looks unique. All right, so I'm going to do one more. I'm going to rotate it this way and just kind of place that there. So we have a nice, neat little scene here. You could probably add maybe a couple more of these plants, maybe in the background to kind of hide maybe the pillar a little bit. And just kind of make the adjustments. And I'll let you kind of play around with this and, you know, add the foliage that you want to add and tell the story that you want to tell in this. You don't have to place things exactly where I do. Just have fun with this and just get an idea of how to get in the mind of being a level artist. Unity is really fun, and I love this part of creating games. So now we've got a nice, neat little area. We have some plants kind of going around the outside because typically that's where water is going to gather. You could add in maybe some grass objects in here, but I'm not going to worry about that at this point. I think we kind of get the idea. So now we've built this level, and I'm really happy with it. There's one other thing that I would like to do, and I just want to set it off with some sort of battle dummy. So in our prefabs folder, there is a battle dummy that has been created as a prefab, and it's just made out of wood and some of the pieces that you'll see here. And so it's something that Voldrik will use to train, and it's something that is just handmade, and we'll have maybe one or two, and you can place them wherever you like in your scene. Take a look at some of these other assets, and you might even get an idea of what else you would like to use. Perhaps maybe some of these lanterns, maybe a lever, and you know, maybe it's hidden and it controls something that we don't know, we can't see what it's actually controlling, or something like that. Think about a narrative that you want to tell and build something really unique. So now that we've finished up with the scene building, let's move on to our next module.